Deep within the verdant heart of West Java, there is a sound that seems to vibrate through the very soles of your feet before it ever reaches your ears. It is the low, rhythmic hum of a landscape that has breathed for millions of years. The air here is heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and crushed ferns, carrying a humidity that clings to the skin like a soft, silken veil. Through the morning mist, a singular shape begins to emerge from the emerald canopy. A hill that rises with a curious, unnatural symmetry against the jagged backdrop of the volcanic horizon. To the casual observer, it appears as nothing more than a beautiful mound of earth, draped in the tangled vines and towering trees of the Indonesian tropics. Yet there is a stillness here that suggests something far older and far more deliberate than the chaotic growth of the jungle. This place is known as Gunung Padang, a name that translates softly into the Mountain of Light, or perhaps more evocatively, the Mountain of Enlightenment. For centuries, the local people have climbed its steep flanks, not merely to admire the view, but to seek a connection with the divine, walking among the strange dark stones that crown its summit. These stones are not the rounded boulders one might expect to find in a riverbed, nor are they the jagged shards of a recent landslide. Instead, they are massive, five-sided pillars of volcanic basalt, long slender columns that look as though they were hewn by the hands of giants and then scattered like toothpicks across a series of rising terraces. As you step onto the first level, the rustle of the surrounding forest seems to fade into a distant murmur, leaving only the sound of your own breath and the cool, damp touch of the ancient rock beneath your palms. The pillars lie in heaps, some standing upright like lonely sentinels, others reclining in the moss, their dark grey surfaces mottled with lichen that has taken centuries to grow. There is a profound sense of deep time here, a feeling that the ground beneath you is not merely soil and roots, but a vessel for a memory so old it has been written in the language of stone. You might find yourself wondering, as you trace the sharp edges of the basalt, how these thousands of tons of rock came to rest so high above the valley floor, and why they seem to form a staircase that leads not just up the mountain, but perhaps back through the layers of human history itself. As you settle into the rhythm of this journey and let the weight of the day begin to drift away, I hope you are finding a sense of peace in these quiet mysteries. If you are settling in for the night and find comfort in these journeys through the past, you are in the right place. Here at the Slumber Archives, we share new history narrations just like this one every single day. So if you find this relaxing, perhaps you might consider subscribing so you never miss a night of exploration. A simple like on the video also helps others who are seeking a quiet moment to find us too. But for now, let us return to the shadows of the mountain and the secrets held within its stones. For a long time, the world looked at Gunung Padang and saw only a megalithic site, a place where ancient people gathered to worship under the stars, perhaps 3,000 years ago. The terraces were thought to be a simple construction of the Bronze Age, a beautiful but relatively modern addition to the Indonesian landscape. But as researchers began to look closer, as they began to peer beneath the surface using ground-penetrating radar and seismic tomography, the mountain began to whisper a different story. It became clear that the hill itself was not entirely a work of nature. Beneath the grass and the scattered pillars, there are layers, hidden chambers and massive walls that suggest the entire mountain might be a giant, stepped pyramid, buried by the debris of ages and the relentless growth of the forest. And so the questions began to multiply, drifting through the humid air like the mountain mist. If the top layer is 3,000 years old, what lies beneath it? The deeper the archaeologists dug, the further back the clock began to turn. They found evidence of a second layer, and then a third, each one older and more sophisticated than the one above it. radiocarbon dating, a method that measures the decay of carbon atoms to tell us how long ago something lived, began to return dates that defied everything we thought we knew about the dawn of civilization. Samples taken from deep within the structure suggested that parts of this mountain were shaped by human hands more than 9,000 years ago, then 13,000, and then, most astonishingly, as far back as 25 or 30,000 years into the past. This would place the origins of Gunung Padang in the depths of the last ice age, a time when the world was a very different place. During this period, known to geologists as the Pleistocene, the sea levels were much lower, and the islands of Indonesia were part of a vast, lost continent called Sundaland. It was a world of cooling temperatures and shifting landscapes, long before the rise of the first known cities in Mesopotamia or the building of the Great Pyramids of Giza. If these dates are correct, it means that a sophisticated culture was moving tens of thousands of tons of volcanic rock, designing complex structures and perhaps even carving out hidden rooms, at a time when mainstream science tells us humans were nothing more than simple hunter-gatherers. The mind struggles to grasp the scale of such deep time. We are talking about a structure that may have stood through the end of the last ice age, through the mysterious and cataclysmic period known as the Younger Dryas, when the world experienced a sudden, violent shift in climate that lasted for over 1,000 years. As you sit amidst the basalt pillars of the Mountain of Light, you realize you are not just looking at a pile of rocks, you are looking at a survivor. This mountain has seen the oceans rise and the forests change. It has watched the stars shift their positions in the heavens over tens of thousands of nights. The air grows cooler as you ascend the terraces, the humidity replaced by a gentle breeze that carries the distant call of a bird from the valley below. Each step upward feels like a step further away from the modern world, away from the noise of the 21st century, and into a silence that is heavy with the weight of forgotten ages. The stratigraphy, the study of these ancient layers of earth and stone, reveals a story of persistence. It tells us that whoever built this place did not do it all at once. They returned to it again and again over thousands of years, building upon the work of their ancestors, honoring a sacred blueprint that had been passed down through generations whose names have been completely erased from the pages of history. And yet, despite the evidence of the radar and the carbon dates, much of the scientific community remains hesitant, cautious to accept that such a massive undertaking could be so incredibly old. It challenges the very foundation of our understanding of human progress. We like to think of history as a straight line, a steady climb from the primitive to the advanced, but Gunung Padang suggests that the line may be curved, or perhaps broken. It hints at a lost chapter of our story, a time when humanity was capable of greatness long before we ever thought possible. As the light begins to soften, casting long, elegant shadows across the basalt columns, the mystery of the Mountain of Light only deepens. You can almost feel the presence of those ancient builders in the precision of the stones, in the way the terraces align with the surrounding peaks and the rising sun. They left no writing, no statues, no names, only the silent, enduring testimony of the mountain itself. The rustle of the leaves in the wind sounds like 1,000 hushed voices speaking in a language we have forgotten how to hear. We are left to wonder, who were they? What did they see from this summit when the world was young? And what other secrets remain hidden, waiting patiently in the dark, cool earth beneath our feet, as the mountain continues its long, slow sleep through the turning of the ages? The sound of a heavy quill scratching against parchment is perhaps the only bridge we have to the moment Gunung Padang first entered the written record of the modern world. In the year 1914, a Dutch historian named Nicolaas Johannes Krom sat amidst the humid air of the colonial East Indies, compiling a report for the Archaeological Service. His handwriting, precise and methodical, captured a site that had long been whispered about by the local villagers of West Java, but had remained invisible to the eyes of Western academia. Crom described a series of massive stone terraces, a staircase of basalt columns rising toward the clouds, which he classified simply as a megalithic site, a place of great stones. At the time, the world was preoccupied with the looming shadows of a great war, and the quiet mountain in the Karyamukti village was seen as little more than a curiosity of the distant past. Crom's initial interpretations were grounded in the prevailing logic of his era. He saw the site as a series of terraces, a place of worship or perhaps a cemetery built by an ancient, though not necessarily prehistoric, culture. To the colonial mind, these were megaliths, large stones used in the construction of a monument, similar to others found across Southeast Asia, from the plains of Laos to the islands of the Pacific. And so, the mountain was catalogued, filed away in a dusty archive, and left to the encroaching emerald vines of the jungle once more. As the decades drifted by, like slow-moving clouds, Gunung Padang slipped into a long period of obscurity. While the great pyramids of Giza were being measured and mapped with obsessive detail, and the ruins of Angkor Wat were being cleared of their silken moss, this Indonesian summit remained a secret shared only by the mountain and those who lived at its feet. The local Sundanese people knew it as a sacred place, a site of meditation and pilgrimage, but to the wider world of science it was a closed book. It is strange to consider how a structure of such immense scale can simply disappear into the landscape, its sharp edges softened by centuries of fallen leaves and the patient, relentless growth of tropical flora. The mountain did not seem like a building. It seemed like a part of the earth itself, a natural hill that happened to wear a crown of broken stones. During this time, the few academics who ventured to the site viewed it through the lens of known history. They compared it to the megalithic traditions of the region, the stone mortars of the Bada Valley, or the dolmens of Sumba, assuming that Gunung Padang was perhaps 2,000 or 2,500 years old. These were the established timelines, the comfortable boundaries of human development that suggested agriculture and complex society had arrived in these islands relatively late. The idea that something much older, something much deeper, could be hiding beneath the surface was a thought that had not yet dared to form. The site was viewed as a surface phenomenon, a collection of scattered rocks on a hilltop, rather than the tip of a much larger, much older iceberg. The basalt columns themselves are fascinating to behold, long five-sided pillars of volcanic rock that look almost as if they were carved by hand, though they are a natural geological formation known as columnar jointing. Imagine giant pencils of stone, cooled from ancient lava into geometric perfection. The mystery lies not in the stones themselves, but in how they were moved, stacked and oriented. In those early years of discovery, it was assumed that ancient people had simply gathered these stones from the surrounding slopes to build their terraces. It was a simple explanation for a simple time, but as the wind sighs through the gaps in the basalt, one cannot help but feel that the early explorers were only scratching the surface of a much longer story. The silence of the mountain throughout the mid-20th century is a testament to the limits of our own curiosity. We often see only what we expect to see, and for nearly 70 years after Crom's report, Gunung Padang was expected to be nothing more than a modest ruin. It remained a place of shadows and whispers, a mountainous puzzle whose pieces had been scattered by time and gravity. The deep time of the mountain, the thousands of years that stretched back before the dawn of recorded history, remained locked away in the stratigraphy, the layers of earth and rock that act as the pages of the planet's diary. Meanwhile, the jungle continued its slow work, roots twisting around the basalt, earthworms churning the soil, and the heavy rains of the monsoon washing away the traces of those who had once climbed these heights. The site sat in a state of suspended animation, a monument to a forgotten purpose, waiting for a new generation of eyes to look past the surface and wonder what lay beneath the grass. It is a humbling thought to realize that a structure of such magnitude could remain hidden in plain sight, masquerading as a natural hill, while the world hurried on into the modern age. As we look back on those early colonial discoveries, we see not just the stones, but the beginning of a long, slow awakening to the possibility that our history is far older and far more complex than we ever dared to imagine. The air atop the mountain of light carries a certain stillness, a quietude that seems to vibrate with the weight of the ages. For many decades, the world accepted the surface at face value, seeing only a collection of basalt columns scattered across a steep verdant incline. But in the year 2011, a new perspective arrived in the form of Dr. Danny Hillman Natawijaja. He did not come with the traditional tools of a romantic explorer, but with the precise analytical mind of a senior geologist at the Indonesian Institute of Sciences. Having spent years studying the tectonic movements of the earth, the shifting plates, and the scars left by ancient earthquakes, Natawijaja possessed an eye trained to see the underlying architecture of the world. When he looked at Gunung Padang, he did not see a simple geological formation. He saw an anomaly, a whisper of something intentional buried beneath the soil. It was a shift in perception that would ripple through the scientific community. To the casual observer, the hill was merely a hill, perhaps a volcanic neck or a natural outcropping shaped by the relentless rains of West Java. But as Natawijaja walked the terraces, he began to notice that the geometry was too deliberate. Nature is rarely so fond of right angles and symmetrical tiers. He began to wonder if the entire mountain was, in fact, a colossal artifact, a structure so vast that it had been mistaken for the landscape itself. This realization led to the formation of the Integrated Survey Team, a multidisciplinary group of experts who sought to peel back the layers of time using modern technology. They were not satisfied with what was visible to the naked eye. They wanted to see the heart of the mountain. As the team began their work, they brought with them ground-penetrating radar and seismic tomography. These are tools that allow us to peer into the earth without disturbing it, sending waves of energy deep into the ground to map the hidden densities of what lies beneath. It is much like taking an ultrasound of the earth itself. As the data began to stream in, the mystery only deepened. The scans did not show the chaotic, uneven density of a natural volcanic hill. Instead, they revealed massive, hollow chambers and long, linear features that looked remarkably like walls and galleries. The seismic waves bounced back with a strange regularity, tracing the outlines of something massive and ancient, something that had been sitting in the dark for thousands of years, waiting for the technology of the future to finally acknowledge its existence. Imagine the feeling of standing on that summit, looking down at the grass beneath your boots and realizing that you are not standing on a mountain, but on a roof. The team began to understand that the surface ruins, the 5 terraces of basalt blocks, were merely the final chapter of a much longer story. Beneath the top layer, which they called Unit 1, there appeared to be a second layer, and then a third, and perhaps even a fourth, reaching down into the very depths of the hill. The ground-penetrating radar suggested that the hill's shape was not entirely natural. It had been modified, sculpted, and reinforced by human hands long before the arrival of the cultures we currently recognize in the historical record. Danny Hillman. Natawijaja's background in geology proved vital here. He knew that the basalt columns themselves were natural. They are formed by the cooling of lava. But he also saw that they had been moved. They had been harvested, transported, and stacked like giant bricks to form a stepped pyramid. The realization was profound. If the hill was man-made, or at least man-altered on such a scale, then the history of civilization in Southeast Asia would need to be entirely rewritten. The team moved with a sense of quiet urgency, aware that every new scan was a step further back into a past that had been utterly forgotten. They were looking at a structure that seemed to defy the established timeline of human development. As the weeks turned into months, the evidence continued to mount. The seismic tomography revealed areas of low density that could only be interpreted as voids, vast rooms or tunnels hidden deep within the core of the structure. These were not the jagged, irregular caves one might find in a natural formation, but spaces that appeared to have been carved or constructed with a specific purpose in mind. The team began to speak of the hill not as a geological feature, but as a monument, a giant, sleeping giant made of stone and earth, draped in a cloak of tropical forest. The more they looked, the more the mountains seemed to dissolve, replaced by the ghost of a civilization that had mastered the art of monumental architecture at a time when we were told humanity was still in its infancy. The transition from viewing Gunung Padang as a natural hill to a man-made structure was not an easy one for the broader scientific world to swallow. It challenged the comfort of our known history. But for Natawidjaja and his team, the data was speaking a language of its own. They saw the way the stones were laid, the way the layers were separated by ancient soils, and the way the entire site was oriented toward the stars and the surrounding peaks. It was an integrated design, a harmony of earth and intent. As the survey continued, the team felt the weight of deep time pressing against them, the realization that they were touching the edge of a mystery that stretched back tens of thousands of years. And so, the work moved from the surface into the strata. They began to take core samples, drilling deep into the mountain to extract cylinders of earth and rock that served as a timeline of the site's construction. These samples would eventually be sent for radiocarbon dating, a process that measures the decay of carbon isotopes to determine the age of organic material. In the quiet of the laboratory, the samples would tell a story of a site that was not hundreds of years old, nor even a few thousand, but one that reached back into the end of the last ice age. The growing realization that the hill's shape was not natural was only the beginning. The true question was not just who had built it, but why they had gone to such incredible lengths to create a monument that would outlast their own memory. The air remains cool on the terraces as the sun begins to dip behind the neighboring volcanoes, casting long, soft shadows across the basalt blocks. One can almost feel the presence of the thousands of people who must have labored here, moving stones that weigh hundreds of pounds, stacking them with a precision that has survived the tremors of the earth and the erosion of the rains. The integrated survey team had opened a door that could not be closed. They had looked beneath the surface and found a reality that was far more complex and far more ancient than anyone had dared to imagine. The mountain was no longer just a mountain. It was a testament to the enduring spirit of a lost epoch, a silent sentinel guarding the secrets of a time before time. As the geological evidence became clearer, the mystery only grew more profound. The seismic maps showed that the structure went down at least 30 meters, perhaps more, into the earth. It was a multi-layered cake of history, each level representing a different era of human activity. The initial use of ground-penetrating radar had acted like a key in a lock, turning slowly to reveal a chamber of secrets that had been sealed for millennia. The team realized that the 5 terraces were just the tip of the iceberg, the visible peak of a submerged continent of human history. The realization was both exhilarating and humbling, a reminder that we are often walking on the shoulders of giants whose names we have long since forgotten. In those early days of the 2011 survey, the atmosphere was one of discovery and quiet awe. Every new data point, every scan of the interior, reinforced the idea that Gunung Padang was a work of profound human will. It was a realization that required a shedding of old assumptions, a willingness to look at the landscape not as a static backdrop, but as a canvas that had been painted on by countless generations. The hill was not just a part of the world, it was a world unto itself, a structured, intentional space that had been built to endure through the vast stretches of deep time. And as the team prepared to share their findings, they knew that the story of this mountain was only just beginning to be told. To walk upon the summit of Gunung Padang is to step onto a stage where the actors have long since departed, leaving only the heavy, silent scenery of their final performance. Imagine the sound of a soft wind whistling through the gaps of thousands of dark, angular stones that seem to possess a strange geometric perfection, as if they were carved by a giant's hand and scattered across the mountain's crest. These are the columnar joints, natural volcanic pillars formed by the cooling of lava millions of years ago. Yet, as we look closer, we see that nature's chaos has been tamed by human intent. Each pillar, some weighing hundreds of pounds, has been carefully selected, transported, and laid down to form a series of 5 rising terraces, like a staircase intended for a god to descend from the clouds. As we stand on the lowest level, the sheer scale of the labor begins to weigh upon the mind. These are not merely rocks piled high, they are the fragments of a lost vocabulary, a language of basalt and earth. The stones are long and slender, often hexagonal or pentagonal in cross-section, and they have been arranged in patterns that mimic the flow of water or the rhythm of a heartbeat. Some lie flat, forming the floor of a courtyard, where perhaps hundreds once gathered, while others stand upright, marking boundaries between the sacred and the profane. There is a profound stillness here, a sense that the very air is thick with the residue of ancient rituals. One can almost feel the vibration of the mountain beneath their feet, a low hum of deep time that connects the modern traveller to the hands that moved these stones thousands of years ago. The craftsmanship involved in this top layer, known to archaeologists as Unit 1, is a testament to a society that possessed both the will and the organizational power to reshape their environment. While the stones themselves were birthed in the fires of the earth, their placement was a deliberate act of devotion. To move these heavy basalt columns up the steep slopes of the volcano required more than just physical strength. It required a vision. They were not merely building a wall or a platform, they were crowning the mountain, giving a face to the wilderness. As we trace the edges of the 5 terraces, we notice how they narrow as they ascend, drawing the eye upward toward the sky, toward the ultimate summit where the most significant ceremonies likely took place. When the first modern researchers began to pull back the veil of vegetation and soil, they sought the most fundamental of answers. When was this place built? Using the process of radiocarbon dating, a method that measures the decay of carbon atoms in organic material to determine its age, they tested the soil and the fragments of charcoal trapped beneath these massive stones. The results whispered a story of the early Iron Age. The data suggests that this topmost layer, the visible skin of the pyramid, was completed somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. In the grand timeline of human history, this places the construction around the time of the rise of the Roman Republic, or the golden age of ancient Greece. Yet even this relatively recent date poses a mystery. While the world elsewhere was focused on marble temples and bronze weaponry, the people of West Java were creating a megalithic masterpiece that felt both archaic and sophisticated. These 5 terraces were not merely functional, they were symbolic. Each level represents a transition, a movement away from the earthly concerns of the valley below and toward a higher state of being. The first terrace is vast and welcoming, while the 5th and highest is intimate and secluded, a place where only the high priests or the tribal elders might have dared to stand. One can imagine the flicker of torchlight against the dark basalt, the smell of incense mingling with the mountain mist, and the low chanting of a people who saw the mountain as a bridge between worlds. The basalt rocks themselves, often called paku alam, or the nails of the earth by local villagers, carry a weight that is more than just physical. They are cold to the touch, even in the midday sun, and their dark, matte surfaces seem to absorb the light rather than reflect it. When the rain falls, as it often does in the lush highlands of Indonesia, the stones turn a deep, glistening black, and the water flows through the channels between them like blood through veins. It is a living monument, one that responds to the elements and the seasons, standing as a silent witness to the passage of empires and the shifting of the stars. As we linger on these terraces, we must ask ourselves what drove a culture to invest so much of its life and energy into such a project. Was it a temple for the worship of ancestors? A place where the living could commune with the spirits of those who had passed into the great beyond? Or was it an astronomical observatory, where the alignments of the stones tracked the movements of the sun and the moon across the tropical sky? The stones offer no easy answers. They only offer their presence, their heavy, unyielding reality. The carbon dating tells us when the final stones were laid, but it does not tell us why, nor does it explain the whispers of much older structures lying just beneath the surface. There is a rhythm to the layout of Gunung Padang that suggests a deep understanding of geometry and harmony. The terraces are not perfectly symmetrical, yet they possess a balance that feels organic, as if the builders were working in collaboration with the mountain rather than trying to conquer it. The way the basalt columns are stacked, some horizontally like logs, others vertically like sentinels, creates a texture that is unique in the world of megalithic architecture. It is a style that is both primitive and incredibly advanced, a paradox etched in stone. As the wind brushes against the grass that now grows between the pillars, one feels the fragility of our own era compared to the enduring strength of this mountain sanctuary. The transition from the wild, forested slopes to the structured terraces of the summit is a threshold between two different ways of existing. Below, the jungle is a chaotic tangle of life and decay, a constant struggle for light and space, but here, on the top layer of Gunung Padang, order reigns. The stones have been disciplined, arranged into a sequence that guides the visitor on a journey of ascent. This was a place of high purpose, a destination for pilgrims who travelled from far and wide to stand atop the mountain of light. Even now, thousands of years later, the sense of arrival is palpable. The view from the top terrace stretches out over a sea of green volcanoes, a landscape that has changed little since the first stones were set in place. Meanwhile, the questions continue to accumulate like the moss on the basalt. If this top layer dates back 3,000 years, who were the people who built it? History books tell us of simple agrarian societies in this region during that period, yet the engineering required to terrace a mountain and transport thousands of tons of volcanic rock suggests a much more complex social structure. They were a people of the mountain, a culture that looked at the heights and saw not a barrier, but a home. They understood the properties of the stone, the way it could be split and stacked, and the way it would endure the torrential rains of the tropics for millennia. As we prepare to look deeper, beneath the soil and the roots of the trees, we must first appreciate this surface layer for what it is, the final chapter of a very long story. It is the skin of the pyramid, the part that was meant to be seen and touched. But as every archaeologist knows, the surface is often just a mask. The 3,000-year-old terraces are a marvel in their own right, but they sit upon a foundation that is far more ancient, far more mysterious, and far more challenging to our understanding of the human past. The stones of the surface are the beginning of the journey, a journey that will take us back through the layers of the earth into the heart of a mountain that has been hiding its true age for longer than we ever dared to imagine. Imagine for a moment the sound of a hollow strike against the earth, a dull thud that echoes not with the density of solid soil, but with the resonance of something hidden beneath. As the researchers began to probe beneath the visible terraces of Gunung Padang, they were not merely digging into dirt, they were peeling back the skin of time itself. Beneath the familiar basalt columns of the surface, the ground began to yield secrets that defied the initial surveys. A few meters down, the organic chaos of nature gave way to a startling, rhythmic order, They found a second layer, a vast subterranean architecture of columnar rocks similar to those above, yet distinct in their arrangement and weathered by a much deeper immersion in the dark, cool womb of the mountain. This second layer, known to the geologists as Layer 2, does not appear to be a random tumble of volcanic debris. Instead, the stones are laid out in deliberate, organized patterns, columns of rock placed horizontally, stacked like the timber of a cabin, or perhaps the defensive walls of a forgotten citadel. There is a profound stillness in these depths, a sense that these stones have not seen the light of the sun for many thousands of years. As the brushes cleared away the sediment, the researchers realized they were looking at a structure that was already ancient when the people of the top terrace first arrived to lay their own stones. The mountain was not just a site, it was a legacy, a foundation upon which successive generations had built, perhaps without even fully understanding what lay beneath their feet. To understand the age of this buried world, the team turned to radiocarbon dating, a process of measuring the decay of carbon atoms within organic matter trapped between the stones. By testing the ancient soils and bits of charcoal wedged deep within the joints of Layer 2, the results returned a timeline that sent ripples through the archaeological community. The dates clustered between 7,000 and 8,000 years ago. In the grand tapestry of human history, this is a period that predates the Great Pyramids of Giza by 3 millennia. It is a time when, according to the standard narrative, the inhabitants of the Indonesian archipelago were supposed to be living in simple, nomadic groups. Yet here, buried under the weight of the ages, was evidence of a massive, coordinated effort to shape the very earth itself. There is a particular mystery to Layer 2 that haunts the mind as one contemplates the labor involved. It is not merely that it exists, but that it was intentionally covered. The stratigraphy, the study of the layers of the earth, suggests that this second level of construction was not simply abandoned to the elements. Instead, it appears to have been purposefully buried under a thick mantle of soil and rock. Why would a culture invest such immense energy into creating a monumental structure, only to hide it away from the world? Was it an act of preservation, a way to protect a sacred space from an encroaching threat or a changing climate? Or was the act of burial itself a ritual, a way of returning the work of human hands back to the spirit of the mountain? As we descend into these older dates, the air of the mystery grows thicker. 7,000 years ago, the world was a very different place. The sea levels were shifting as the last remnants of the great ice sheets melted into the oceans, and the land bridges of Southeast Asia were being swallowed by the rising tides. Amidst this global transformation, someone at Gunung Padang was carving out a sanctuary of stone. The precision of the arrangements suggests a society with a sophisticated understanding of engineering and a social structure capable of mobilizing hundreds, perhaps thousands, of workers. They worked in the quiet shadows of the prehistoric jungle, moving pillars of basalt that weigh hundreds of pounds, fitting them together with a silent, stony logic that we are only just beginning to decode. We must pause to consider the weight of 7,000 years. It is a span of time that encompasses the rise and fall of countless empires, the birth of languages now forgotten, and the shifting of the stars in the night sky. When these stones were being laid, the Sahara was still a green savanna, and the first cities of Mesopotamia were still thousands of years in the future. The people of Layer 2 lived in a world of deep greens and vibrant life, a world where the boundary between the human and the divine was perhaps as thin as the mist that clings to the slopes of the mountain in the early morning. They left no written records, no names of kings, no accounts of their triumphs or their sorrows, only the stones and the silence of the earth that covers them. The discovery of this second layer challenges the very foundation of how we view the progress of civilization. It suggests that the path of human development was not a straight, ascending line from simplicity to complexity, but rather a series of peaks and valleys, a story of great heights reached and then lost to the shadows of time. As the researchers continued to dig, they found that the soil between the stones was remarkably clean, lacking the usual debris of daily life, the broken pottery or discarded tools one might expect to find in a living space. This reinforces the idea that Gunung Padang was never a city for the living, but a place of high purpose, a temple, an observatory, or perhaps something for which we have no modern name. And so, we find ourselves standing on the threshold of an even deeper enigma. If the second layer is 7,000 years old, what lies even further down? The sensors and the drills have whispered of even older structures, of a layer 3 and a layer 4 that reach back into the heart of the Ice Age. The mountain is like a great stone book, and we have only just finished reading the second chapter. As we prepare to look deeper, we must open our minds to the possibility that the history we have been taught is only a fragment of a much larger, much older story, a story that has been waiting in the dark, beneath the roots of the trees and the weight of the soil for 30,000 years. Imagine a needle, long and hollow, pressing slowly through the skin of the earth, passing through the tangled roots of the modern world and descending into a silence that has not been disturbed for hundreds of generations. This is the work of the core drill, a tool that allows us to peer into the deep stratigraphy, the layered history of the soil, without dismantling the mountain itself. As the drill bit turned at Gunung Padang, pulling up cylinders of earth and stone, the researchers found something that defied the conventional maps of our past. Beneath the surface layers of the 5 terraces, they encountered a massive intentional structure of rock fragments, neatly arranged and packed with a precision that suggests a grand architectural vision. This is layer 3, a subterranean monolith that rests far below the reach of the sun, hidden in a darkness that has lasted for more than 25,000 years. The material brought to the surface was not the random debris of a volcanic eruption or the chaotic scattering of a landslide. Instead, the core samples revealed columns of andesite, the same heavy volcanic rock found on the surface, but these were broken into smaller pieces and meticulously fitted together using a sort of ancient mortar, a mixture of clay and iron-rich minerals. It was as if a giant hand had gathered the bones of the mountain and reassembled them into a solid, enduring foundation. When the organic material trapped within this mortar was subjected to radiocarbon dating, a process that measures the decay of carbon atoms to tell us when a living thing last breathed or grew, the results were nothing short of transformative. The dates did not come back as 2,000 years old, or even 5,000. The clock stopped at 16,000 years, then 22,000, and finally at the deepest reaches of layer 3, the numbers touched 28,000 years before the Common Era. To stand at the edge of such a date is to stand at the precipice of a different world. 30,000 years ago, the Earth was a vastly different place, locked in the cold embrace of the last glacial maximum, the height of the most recent ice age. While we are taught that our ancestors were scattered bands of nomadic hunters struggling to survive in a landscape of ice and tundra, the stones of Gunung Padang suggest a different narrative. They whisper of a people who possessed the social organization to coordinate massive labor, the engineering knowledge to manage water and weight, and the artistic drive to shape the very landscape into a monument of permanence. As the core samples were analyzed, the weight of this deep time began to settle over the site. If these dates are accurate, it means that while the mammoths still roamed the northern plains and the sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than they are today, someone was here, on this tropical hillside, laying the foundations for a structure that would rival the great pyramids of Giza in its ambition. The transition from the surface to layer 3 is not merely a change in depth, it is a journey across a vast temporal gulf. we must consider what it means for a civilization to build during the Paleolithic, the Old Stone Age. In the traditional view of history, this was an era of simple stone tools and temporary shelters. Yet, the stratigraphy of Gunung Padang presents a sophisticated building project that predates the invention of agriculture, the wheel, and even the earliest known cities of Mesopotamia by tens of thousands of years. The sheer volume of stone moved and shaped for Layer 3 suggests a population that was settled, organized, and perhaps driven by a purpose we can no longer fully comprehend. Was it a temple, a fortress, or perhaps a sanctuary built to withstand the shifting climates of a planet in flux? The stones remain silent, but their arrangement speaks of a deliberate intent to endure, to create something that would last long after the builders themselves had faded into the mists of the Younger Dryas, the sudden cold snap that marked the end of the last ice age. As we look at these core samples, we are looking at the fingerprints of a lost epoch. The deeper we go, the more the mountain reveals itself to be a composite of different ages, a vertical timeline of human effort. Layer 3 acts as a massive pedestal, a hidden architecture that supports everything above it. It suggests that Gunung Padang was not built all at once, but was a site of continuous or recurring importance, a sacred space that was reclaimed and rebuilt by successive cultures over tens of thousands of years. Each group of people who came to this hill felt the presence of what lay beneath their feet, and they added their own chapter to the stone book, unaware that the foundation of their work was already ancient beyond reckoning. The implications of a 30,000-year-old pyramid challenge the very foundation of how we define civilization. We often think of progress as a straight line, a steady climb from the primitive to the complex. But Gunung Padang suggests a more cyclical story, one where great heights are reached, lost, and then forgotten, only to be buried under the slow accumulation of soil and forest. The mountain reminds us that the earth is a master of concealment, and that our current understanding of the human story may only be the most recent layer of a much deeper, much more mysterious reality. As the wind moves through the trees atop the terraces today, it carries the scent of the same rain that fell 30,000 years ago, washing over the same stones that were placed there by hands we will never hold, and minds whose thoughts have been lost to the long, slow passage of the ages. To understand the true nature of Gunung Padang, one must first look closely at the very bones of the earth, for the line between what nature provides and what humanity shapes is often as thin as a shadow at noon. In the volcanic landscapes of West Java, the earth speaks in a language of fire and cooling, creating structures that can easily deceive the untrained eye. When molten lava cools slowly beneath the surface, it shrinks and cracks into long geometric pillars known as columnar joints. These are the same hexagonal basalt pipes that form the Giant's Causeway in Ireland or the Devil's Tower in Wyoming. At Gunung Padang, the mountain is composed of these natural wonders, stacked by the invisible hands of geothermal pressure into neat vertical bundles that look, for all the world, like a forest of stone. It is here that the debate begins to simmer like a dormant caldera, for the skeptics point to these columns as proof that the site is merely a geological curiosity, a hill of natural basalt that has simply been weathered by the elements over the millennia. And yet, when one walks among the terraces, a different story begins to emerge, a story of intentionality. While the stones themselves are natural, their arrangement often defies the laws of random cooling. In many areas, these massive pillars, some weighing hundreds of kilograms, have been laid horizontally, stacked like cordwood to create walls, pathways, and retaining structures. They have been carried, tilted, and wedged into place, forming a complex geometry that nature rarely achieves on its own. It is as if an ancient architect looked upon a natural quarry and decided to reorganize the chaos into a symphony of form. As we look closer at the spaces between these stones, we find something even more provocative than the rocks themselves. In the deeper layers of the excavation, researchers have discovered a substance that does not belong to the natural geology of the hill. It is a kind of ancient mortar, or filling material, a mixture of clay, iron, and silica that appears to have been used to bond the basalt columns together. In some instances, this material shows evidence of having been refined, perhaps even heated, to create a primitive but effective cement. Nature does not produce mortar in neat layers between stones. It does not seek to seal the gaps against the intrusion of water or the shifts of the earth. This presence of a binding agent suggests that the builders of Gunung Padang were not merely stacking rocks. They were engineering a monument designed to withstand the crushing weight of time itself. This engineering becomes even more apparent when we turn our gaze inward, peering through the skin of the mountain, using the modern magic of electromagnetic surveys and ground-penetrating radar. These tools allow us to see what lies beneath the soil without ever disturbing a single blade of grass, and what they have revealed is nothing short of breathtaking. Deep within the heart of the hill, at depths of 10 to 15 meters, the scans show large rectangular voids, hollow spaces with high electrical resistivity that suggest the presence of man-made chambers. These are not the irregular, jagged caves one might expect from natural volcanic activity. Instead, they appear to be structured rooms, some as long as 10 meters, connected by what look like narrow corridors or shafts. Imagine for a moment the darkness within those hidden halls, rooms that have not felt the touch of sunlight for perhaps 20,000 years or more. While the surface of the mountain has been washed by the rains and trodden by the feet of modern pilgrims, these internal chambers remain sealed, preserved in a silent, subterranean world. The electromagnetic data suggests that these voids are not filled with water or collapsed debris, but remain open, waiting for someone to find the key to their entrance. If these are indeed chambers, they represent a level of subterranean architecture that predates the pyramids of Giza by tens of thousands of years, challenging every timeline we have ever been taught about when humans first learned to carve spaces out of the living rock. As the years passed and the research deepened, the mystery only grew more complex. The surveys indicated that the entire hill is not a solid mass of earth, but a multi-layered construction, a series of terraces built one on top of the other over vast stretches of time. The outermost layer, which we see today, may only be the final skin of a much older and more profound structure. Below it lies a second layer of stones, and below that a third, each separated by thousands of years of history. It is as if the mountain was a living thing that grew in stages, with each new generation of inhabitants adding their own layer of devotion to the work of their ancestors. This process of building upon the old is a common theme in sacred sites around the world, but nowhere else does it seem to reach back so far into the misty depths of the Pleistocene. The question then arises, why? Why would a people living in the shadow of the Great Ice Age, a time when we are told humanity consisted only of simple hunter-gatherers, go to such immense lengths to modify a mountain? The effort required to move thousands of tons of basalt and to construct internal chambers would have been monumental, requiring a level of social organization and long-term planning that mainstream history suggests did not exist 30,000 years ago. Perhaps the mountain was a temple, a place where the earth met the sky, or perhaps it was a fortress, a refuge against a world that was changing rapidly as the ice began to melt and the seas began to rise. Or maybe it was a library of stone, a way for a forgotten culture to whisper a message across the eons, ensuring that even if their names were lost, their presence would remain undeniable. The presence of these chambers and the evidence of human modification suggest that Gunung Padang is not just a hill, but a colossal piece of landscape art, a fusion of geology and genius. As the electromagnetic waves bounce back from the depths, they carry with them the echoes of a lost capability. We are forced to wonder how many other mountains around the world are hiding similar secrets, masked by the slow growth of forests and the deceptive simplicity of natural shapes. The earth is patient, and it is very good at keeping its secrets, but every so often, a crack appears in the narrative, and we are allowed a glimpse into a past that is far older, far stranger, and far more sophisticated than we ever dared to imagine. As the wind sighs through the basalt pillars on the upper terraces, one can almost feel the weight of those subterranean voids pressing up from below. They are like lungs that haven't breathed in an eternity, holding within them the air of an age when the stars looked different in the sky, and the giants of the animal kingdom still roamed the plains of Sundaland. The study of Gunung Padang is not merely a study of rocks and mortar. It is a search for the lost chapters of our own biography. It reminds us that we are a species with amnesia, standing upon the ruins of a history we have forgotten how to read, while beneath our feet the mountain waits, silent, heavy, and full of a truth that time has yet to fully reveal. Imagine, for a moment, the sound of a dry leaf skittering across a vast, open plain that no longer exists. A sound carried on a cool wind that once swept through a valley, now buried under hundreds of feet of salt water. To understand the mystery of Gunung Padang, we must first unlearn the map of the world as we know it today. We must peel back the blue edges of the Indian and Pacific Oceans to reveal a hidden geography, a phantom limb of the earth known to geologists and dreamers alike as Sundaland. During the height of the last ice age, roughly 20,000 years ago, the planet's water was not where it is now. Vast quantities of moisture were locked away in massive ice sheets, some 2 miles thick, covering much of the northern hemisphere. Because the water was trapped in ice, the global sea levels were significantly lower, nearly 400 feet lower than they are today. As the tides receded over thousands of years, a secret continent began to emerge from the depths. The islands we now call Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines were not isolated fragments of land scattered across a turquoise sea. They were the high peaks and mountain ridges of a massive, contiguous landmass. This was Sundaland, a territory twice the size of India, a lush tropical paradise that connected mainland Asia all the way to the edges of Australia. It was a world of unimaginable fertility, where today there is only the shallow floor of the Java Sea. There were once winding, majestic river systems, larger and more powerful than the Mekong or the Amazon. These rivers flowed through deep emerald valleys, feeding vast rainforests and open savannas where exotic megafauna roamed. For the early humans of this era, Sundaland was not a difficult frontier to be conquered, but perhaps the most hospitable environment on the entire planet. While the rest of the world struggled against the biting chill of the glacial north, the inhabitants of Sundaland lived in a perpetual, temperate spring. They walked across land bridges that have long since vanished, following the migration of animals and the ripening of fruit, moving with a freedom that our modern borders would never allow. As we look at the sophisticated stonework of Gunung Padang, we have to ask if this mountain was once the spiritual heart of this lost world. If a culture had thousands of years of stability in such a bountiful land, what might they have achieved? Some researchers suggest that Sundaland was the true cradle of civilization, a primary source from which all later cultures flowed. It is a haunting thought to consider that the very first cities, the first temples, and the first great libraries of human knowledge may not be buried under the sands of Mesopotamia or Egypt, but are instead resting in the dark, pressurized silence of the ocean floor. The transition from this golden age to our own was not a gentle one. As the Ice Age began to wane, a period known to science as the Younger Dryas brought about a series of cataclysmic shifts. The great ice sheets melted with terrifying speed, and the sea levels began to rise in 3 massive, sudden pulses. Imagine the sheer scale of the displacement, the slow-motion drowning of a continent. Over several millennia, the low-lying plains of Sundaland were swallowed by the encroaching tides. The great river valleys became straits, the hills became islands, and the coastal cities, if they existed, were lost to the rising mud and silt. Those who survived were forced to retreat to higher ground, carrying with them the fragments of their culture, their stories, and their architectural secrets. This brings us back to the high, volcanic ridges of West Java, where Gunung Padang stands. In the context of a drowning continent, this site takes on a new significance. It was not just a temple, it was a sanctuary. It was high ground. If the lower reaches of Sundaland were being reclaimed by the sea, the survivors would have sought out the most prominent, sacred locations to preserve their legacy. The massive basalt columns that form the terraces of the pyramid might be the enduring echoes of a civilization that saw its world disappearing beneath the waves. When we perform radiocarbon dating on the deeper layers of the site, a process that measures the decay of carbon atoms to tell us how long ago an organic material lived, and we see dates stretching back 16,000, 20,000, or even 30,000 years, we are looking at a timeline that aligns perfectly with the existence of Sundaland. The stratigraphy of the site, the study of the different layers of earth and stone stacked like the pages of a book, suggests a history of continuous occupation and rebuilding. It is as if each successive generation felt the weight of the mountain's importance, adding their own masonry to the work of the ancestors. But the oldest layers, the ones buried deepest within the volcanic heart of the hill, remain the most provocative. They suggest a level of organized labor and astronomical alignment that mainstream history says should not have existed so long ago. We are taught that 30,000 years ago, humans were simple hunter-gatherers. Yet, the geometry of Gunung Padang whispers a different story, a story of a people who understood the stars, the earth, and the permanence of stone. Meanwhile, the migration patterns of these early people offer another piece of the puzzle. As the land bridges of Sundaland began to narrow and vanish, the population was pushed outward in a great radial dispersion. This may explain why we find curious similarities in myths, languages, and pyramid-building techniques across the Pacific and into the Americas. If Sundaland was the center of the wheel, its destruction sent the spokes of humanity flying to the far corners of the earth. They carried with them a memory of a lost paradise, a memory that would eventually crystallize into the legends of Atlantis, or the Indonesian tales of a sunken kingdom called Aztlan. As the narrator of this history, I invite you to feel the vastness of this time. Think of the thousands of years that passed while the ocean rose inch by inch, foot by foot. The people living on the coast would have seen their ancestral lands turn into salt marshes, then lagoons, and finally, open sea. The trauma of this loss must have been woven into the very fabric of their identity. Perhaps Gunung Padang was built as a defiance against that loss, a way to anchor their presence to the earth in a way that the water could never wash away. It stands as a monument to a time when the map of our world was whole and the spirit of humanity was already reaching for the infinite. The mystery of Sundaland is a reminder of how fragile our footprint on this planet truly is. We build our cities on the coastlines, just as they likely did, forgetting that the boundaries between land and sea are not permanent. Beneath the waves of the Java Sea, there are likely ruins that would rewrite every textbook ever written, but they are guarded by the currents and the deep, suffocating silt. For now, we only have the high places. We have the peaks that remained above the water, like Gunung Padang, serving as silent witnesses to a chapter of our biography that has been almost entirely erased. And so, we look to the stones. We look to the way they are stacked, the way they catch the light of the setting sun, and the way they seem to vibrate with a frequency of deep, ancient time. The hypothesis of a lost Sundaland culture is more than just a geological theory. It is a search for our collective origin. It asks us to consider that we are not the first to reach these heights of sophistication, and that our ancestors may have known things about the rhythm of the earth that we are only just beginning to remember. As the mountain waits in the humid air of the Indonesian night, it keeps its secrets well, nestled in the roots of the trees and the cold, dark spaces between the basalt blocks, waiting for a time when we are finally ready to listen to the story of the world that was. Imagine for a moment the sound of a low-frequency hum, the kind of resonance that occurs when the wind moves across the mouth of a deep, hollow vessel. Deep beneath the weathered skin of Gunung Padang, far below the moss-covered pillars that lean like tired giants against the sky, there is a silence that feels heavier than the earth itself. It is the silence of empty space where there should be solid rock. As researchers began to peer through the layers of the mountain using ground-penetrating radar and seismic tomography, technologies that act as a sort of digital clairvoyance, they discovered that the hill was not merely a pile of volcanic debris. Instead, the scans revealed 3 distinct, massive cavities hidden hundreds of feet below the surface, cradled within the very heart of the structure. These are not the jagged, irregular cracks one might expect from natural tectonic shifts or the cooling of ancient lava. They are geometric. They are intentional. They are voids that seem to defy the crushing weight of the mountain, pressing down upon them from every side. The largest of these chambers lies directly beneath the central summit, a vast rectangular pocket of air and shadow that measures nearly 15 meters in length. It sits in a state of perpetual darkness, a room that has not seen the light of a star or the flicker of a torch for perhaps 20,000 years. The orientation of these voids is particularly striking, as they appear to align with the primary axis of the terraces above, suggesting a master plan that spans from the deepest foundations to the highest peaks. To find such precise, rectangular shapes so deep within a natural landform is a profound architectural anomaly. In the world of geology, nature rarely works in straight lines or perfect right angles over such large scales. When we see a void that maintains its integrity under millions of tons of pressure, we are forced to ask how it was braced, how it was carved, and most importantly, why it was placed there in the first place. As we contemplate the existence of these hidden rooms, the mind naturally wanders toward their purpose, drifting through the possibilities like smoke in a drafty hall. Some researchers suggest they may be tombs, the final resting places of a priestly class or a forgotten line of kings who ruled when the world was still gripped by the ice of the Younger Dryas, a period of sudden cooling temperatures that occurred roughly 12,800 years ago. Perhaps these chambers were designed to protect the remains of the honored dead from the cataclysms of the surface, keeping them in a state of lithic stasis where time could not touch them. Others look toward the idea of a temple, a subterranean sanctum where the elite of this lost civilization performed rituals in total isolation from the outside world. There is a certain power in the thought of a priest descending through narrow shafts into the belly of the earth, where the heartbeat of the mountain is the only sound, and the darkness is so thick it feels like a physical weight against the skin. Yet there is a third possibility that carries a more pragmatic, though no less mysterious weight, the idea of storage. If Gunung Padang was indeed a refuge during a time of global instability, these chambers could have served as vaults for seeds, records, or technologies that the builders deemed too precious to lose. We see similar structures in the vast underground cities of Derinkuyu in Turkey, where thousands of people lived in hidden networks to escape the dangers of the surface. Could these Indonesian voids be the remnants of a similar survival strategy? The technical difficulty of constructing such spaces cannot be overstated. To hollow out a mountain of basalt, a stone so hard it rings like metal when struck, requires a level of engineering that rivals the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza. It requires an understanding of structural load-bearing and ventilation that we typically do not attribute to people living 30,000 years ago. And so, we find ourselves standing at a threshold, looking at data points on a screen that represent a reality we are not yet fully equipped to understand. The basalt blocks that form the walls of these cavities are not merely stacked, they are integrated into the natural geology in a way that blurs the line between what was grown by the earth and what was shaped by the hand. As the seismic waves travel through the ground, they slow down as they hit these pockets of air, creating a ghostly map of a world beneath our feet. It is a map of a labyrinth that has no known entrance. No tunnels have yet been cleared to these depths, and no human eye has looked upon these walls since the dawn of recorded history. They remain as bubbles of time, preserved within the cooling embrace of the volcanic rock. The sheer audacity of the builders, to dream of a room inside a mountain, and then to manifest that dream through sheer will and primitive tools, speaks to a human spirit that has always sought to leave a mark upon the eternal. Meanwhile, the skeptics point to the possibility of natural lava tubes, which can indeed form long, hollow galleries as molten rock flows and cools, but lava tubes are typically serpentine, winding their way through the earth like the paths of underground rivers. They do not usually possess the sharp 90-degree corners or the deliberate stacking of pillars that the scans at Gunung Padang suggest. Furthermore, the placement of these chambers directly beneath the most sacred areas of the upper terraces implies a vertical connection, a spiritual or functional link between the heavens above and the underworld below. It is as if the mountain was envisioned as a bridge, a solid stone conduit where the energies of the earth and the sky could meet in the dark, quiet center of the hill. As the years passed and more data was gathered, the mystery only deepened. The stratigraphic layers, those distinct bands of earth and stone that tell the story of time, show that the area around these chambers was reinforced with a type of ancient mortar, a mixture of clay, iron, and silica that acted as a prehistoric cement. This suggests that the builders were not just digging, they were stabilizing. They were ensuring that their creation would endure for tens of millennia, long after their names had faded into the mists of legend. We are looking at a feat of civil engineering that predates the invention of the wheel, the discovery of bronze, and the rise of the first known cities in Mesopotamia. It is a humbling thought, one that invites us to reconsider the entire timeline of human progress. In the quiet hours of the night, when the mountain is draped in the silver light of a tropical moon, one can almost feel the presence of these voids. They are like the lungs of the mountain, holding a breath that has been trapped for an eternity. What air remains inside them? Is it the same air that circulated when the mammoths still roamed the northern tundras? If we were to open them, what would we find? Perhaps nothing but dust and the smell of old stone, or perhaps we would find the keys to a chapter of our history that was torn out and burned by the passage of time. The technical mastery required to create such voids suggests a society with a complex social structure, a surplus of resources, and a vision that extended far beyond the immediate needs of survival. It suggests a people who were thinking in terms of geological time, building not for their children, but for a future they could only imagine. As we move deeper into the study of these architectural anomalies, we must proceed with a sense of reverence. To disturb such a place is to wake a sleeper, who has been dreaming for 30,000 years. The mountain does not give up its secrets easily, and perhaps that is for the best. The mystery of the chambers serves as a reminder that for all our modern satellites and sophisticated sensors, the Earth still holds vast, uncharted territories right beneath our feet. We are walking upon the roof of a world we do not know. And so, the mountain continues its long watch, cradling its 3 silent hearts in the dark, waiting for the day when the descendants of its builders are wise enough to understand the message written in the stone. A single grain of sand, when viewed through the lens of a microscope, can tell a story of eons, yet the interpretation of that story often depends entirely upon who is peering through the glass. As the whispers of a 30,000-year-old civilization began to drift down from the heights of Gunung Padang, they were met not just with wonder, but with the cold, sharpening steel of academic scrutiny. The mountain, which had seemed to offer up its secrets so willingly to the drill bit and the radar, suddenly became a battlefield of perspective, a place where the lines between ancient masonry and the natural whims of the earth began to blur into a soft, grey haze. To understand the weight of this controversy, one must look closely at the very glue that holds the mountain together. The research team led by Danny Hillman Natawijaja identified a substance between the massive columnar joints, a dark, clay-like material they described as a prehistoric mortar, a deliberate cement used by ancient hands to bond the stones into a cohesive fortress. If this substance was indeed man-made, the radiocarbon dates pulled from it, stretching back 25,000 years and beyond, would rewrite every textbook on the shelf. It would mean that while the rest of humanity was purportedly struggling to survive the height of the last ice age, a sophisticated society in West Java was already mastering the art of monumental architecture. However, the traditional archaeological community looks upon these same dark veins and sees something far more mundane. They suggest that what appears to be mortar is, in truth, nothing more than the natural byproduct of weathering. In the humid, relentless embrace of the Indonesian tropics, volcanic rock does not remain pristine. It breaks down, it decomposes, and it leaches minerals that settle into the gaps between the stones, creating a silty residue that can mimic the appearance of a binder. To these skeptics, the ancient dates are not a record of human labor, but a record of the Earth's own slow geological decay. They argue that carbon-14 testing, a method that measures the decay of carbon isotopes to determine age, is only as reliable as the context of the sample. If the carbon being tested is simply ancient soil that washed into a natural crack 10,000 years ago, it tells us nothing about when or if a human hand ever touched the stone. This leads to the heart of the academic storm, the danger of misinterpreting the language of the layers. In the study of stratigraphy, the way the Earth deposits itself in successive blankets over time, there is a constant struggle to distinguish between the intentional and the accidental. The critics of the Gunung Padang high chronology theory point to the surrounding landscape, noting that the entire region is a volcanic wonderland. The pillars themselves are natural formations created when molten lava cools and shrinks into hexagonal columns, a process known as columnar jointing. Because these pillars occur naturally, the skeptics argue that the pyramid may simply be a natural hill that was lightly modified by much later inhabitants, perhaps during the megalithic period, only a few thousand years ago. They see a hill dressed in stone, rather than a stone monument built from the ground up. And so, a quiet but fierce tension began to grow, one that transcended the simple analysis of rocks and dirt. It became a clash of philosophies. On one side stood the pioneers, those who felt that the rigid boundaries of mainstream archaeology were blinding us to a deeper, more profound human history. A history that perhaps included a lost epoch of civilization that perished at the end of the Younger Dryas, that mysterious period of cooling and warming that reshaped the world 12,000 years ago. To them, the skepticism felt like a refusal to see the truth standing right in front of them, a stubborn adherence to a timeline that was increasingly being challenged by sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. On the other side stood the practitioners of rigorous scientific skepticism, who worried that the desire for a grand narrative was clouding the empirical evidence. They cautioned that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and that to claim a 30,000-year-old pyramid exists is to claim that everything we know about the slow, agonizing climb of human social evolution is wrong. They feared that the excitement of the discovery was being fueled by something other than pure data, something more akin to a longing for a glorious, forgotten past. This tension was further complicated by the powerful undercurrent of nationalist pride. For Indonesia, a nation with a rich and diverse heritage, the prospect of Gunung Padang being the oldest pyramid in the world is a point of immense cultural significance. It represents a claim to being the cradle of civilization itself, a jewel in the crown of the archipelago that predates the wonders of Egypt or Mesopotamia. When the government threw its support behind the excavations, providing funding and military assistance to clear the site, the academic debate took on a political weight. The critics felt that the rush to validate the site's extreme age was being driven by a desire for a national symbol, while the supporters felt that the international community was simply dismissive of a breakthrough occurring outside the traditional Western centers of learning. As the years passed, the mountain remained indifferent to these human quarrels. The rain continued to fall, washing over the andesite blocks, and the moss grew thick and green over the controversial mortar. The deeper one digs into the controversy, the more one realizes that archaeology is rarely just about the past. It is about the stories we tell ourselves in the present. It is about our hunger for origins and our fear of being wrong. The debate over Gunung Padang serves as a quiet reminder of how little we truly know about the deep time of our own species. We see the world through the narrow slit of recorded history, a mere 5,000 years, and assume that the darkness before it was empty, a long night of primitive wandering. But the earth is patient, and its layers are deep. Whether the mountain is a natural wonder or a man-made marvel, it forces us to confront the limits of our certainty. It invites us to sit in the stillness of the unknown, to listen to the wind as it whistles through the stones, and to wonder if we are the first to call this planet home, or merely the latest in a long, long line of dreamers who looked at the mountains and saw something more than just rock. The conflict remains unresolved, a lingering question mark etched into the landscape of West Java. For every geologist who sees a natural hill, there is an engineer who sees a structural design. For every archaeologist who sees a simple megalithic site, there is a visionary who sees the shadow of a lost world. And perhaps, in the silence of the night, both are true in their own way. The mountain does not care for our labels or our timelines. It simply exists, a monument to the enduring mystery of the earth, waiting for the next layer of dust to settle, the next generation to wonder, and the next soft rain to wash away the traces of our passing. Deep beneath the souls of those who walk these terraces, the basalt stones seem to hum with a frequency tuned to the very rotation of the planet. If you were to stand upon the highest point of Gunung Padang during the deep violet hours of the pre-dawn, you might notice that the mountain does not stand in isolation, but rather acts as a central node in a vast terrestrial web. The 5 ascending terraces are not merely stairs toward the clouds. They are precision instruments, carved and placed to mirror the jagged silhouette of the horizon. As the mist begins to thin, the sharp volcanic peaks of Mount Gede and Mount Pangrango emerge in the distance, their summits forming a perfect silent dialogue with the megalithic pillars at your feet. It is as if the builders were not content to simply inhabit the land, but felt a profound need to tether their architecture to the giants of the earth, ensuring that every stone was an echo of the mountains that birthed them. The orientation of the main axis at Gunung Padang is perhaps its most haunting feature, a deliberate alignment that suggests a sophisticated understanding of the heavens long before the dawn of recorded history. The terraces are laid out along a north-northwest to south-southeast line, a path that draws the eye directly toward the massive, slumbering form of Mount Gede. This is not a coincidence of geography, but a calculated choice. In the eyes of the ancient architects, the mountain was likely more than a landmark. It was a deity, a source of fire and life, and the pyramid was a mirror intended to capture its essence. By aligning their sacred space with these volcanic sentinels, the people of the Younger Dryas, that mysterious period of cooling and upheaval roughly 12,000 years ago, created a bridge between the human and the geological. They sought a stability that the shifting climate could not provide, anchoring their culture to the permanent, unmoving features of the landscape. As we look closer at the arrangement of the columnar joints, those long five-sided stones that look like frozen timber, we find hints of a celestial calendar written in rock. Researchers have observed that the primary axis of the site may have once pointed toward specific stellar configurations that have since shifted due to the slow, wobbling precession of the Earth's axis. Thousands of years ago, the stars would have risen and set in different positions than they do today, and yet, when we wind back the clock of the cosmos, the stones begin to align with the ghosts of ancient constellations. There is a quiet suggestion here that Gunung Padang served as a prehistoric observatory, a place where the movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars were tracked with painstaking devotion. To these early inhabitants, the sky was not a void, but a map, and by marking the solstices and the equinoxes, they were able to harmonize their lives with the rhythmic breathing of the universe. Imagine the effort required to haul these massive stones up the steep slopes, not merely for shelter, but to ensure they caught the first light of the sun on a specific morning of the year. This devotion speaks to a belief system where the high ground was the only place where the veil between the earth and the heavens grew thin. In many ancient cultures, mountains were viewed as the axis mundi, the center of the world, where the vertical line of the spirit meets the horizontal plane of the physical. Gunung Padang, with its layers of hidden chambers and stacked terraces, functions as a man-made mountain atop a natural one, a double-layered conduit for reaching upward. The builders understood that to see the stars clearly, one must rise above the humid canopy of the jungle, escaping the shadows of the valley to find a place where the air is thin and the light is pure. The role of the site as a ritual center is inseparable from its astronomical function. In the stillness of the night, the arrangement of the stones creates a sense of order amidst the chaotic growth of the surrounding forest. While the jungle seeks to reclaim and tangle, the stones remain straight, purposeful, and directed toward the infinite. This is the hallmark of a civilization that viewed time not as a straight line, but as a great repeating circle. By tracking the stars, they could predict the return of the rains, the time for planting, and the moments when the gods were most likely to listen. The orientation toward the nearby volcanoes adds a layer of terrestrial power to this celestial pursuit, a recognition that the forces beneath the earth are just as vital as the lights above it. One cannot help but wonder if the deepest, oldest layers of the pyramid, those dated to 20,000 years or more, were laid down by a people who saw the sky differently than we do. In that era, the northern star was not Polaris, but perhaps a different light entirely, and the constellations we recognize today would have been slightly distorted, like a reflection in rippling water. If Gunung Padang truly dates back to the height of the last ice age, then it stands as a witness to a world we can barely imagine, a time when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower, and the Indonesian archipelago was part of a vast, lost continent known as Sundaland. In this context, the observatory on the hill was not just a local temple, but a beacon for a maritime civilization that navigated by the very stars these stones were meant to track. The precision of the alignments suggests a mastery of geometry that mainstream history typically reserves for the much later civilizations of Mesopotamia or Egypt. And yet, here in the heart of West Java, the evidence sits in the open air, weathered by millennia of tropical storms. The stones do not lie, they point. They point toward the rising sun, toward the volcanic peaks, and toward a past that refuses to be forgotten. As the wind whistles through the gaps between the basalt columns, it sounds almost like a long-held breath being released, a sigh from a culture that invested everything into the belief that their home was part of a larger cosmic design. Meanwhile, the modern visitor finds themselves caught in the same spell that must have captivated the ancients. Standing on the fifth terrace, looking out over the emerald valleys as the light fades, the connection between the ground and the galaxy feels tangible. The mountain becomes a pedestal for the human spirit, a place where the mundane worries of survival are traded for the quiet contemplation of deep time. The builders of Gunung Padang knew that by elevating their sacred space, they were inviting the heavens to descend. They created a sanctuary where the sun could be captured in a doorway and the stars could be framed by stone, turning the entire mountain into a living clock that continues to tick, even if we have forgotten how to read its face. As the years passed and new layers were added by successive generations, the original astronomical intent may have evolved, but the orientation remained sacred. Each new group of inhabitants respected the lines drawn by their ancestors, building atop the old foundations and maintaining the site's alignment with the volcanic peaks. This continuity suggests a long-lasting tradition, a golden thread of knowledge passed down through the centuries, even as the world around them changed. The site was a constant, a fixed point in a shifting world, providing a sense of place and purpose to those who sought the wisdom of the heights. The connection between the earth and the heavens was not a fleeting thought, but the very foundation upon which this entire structure was raised. In the soft glow of the moon, the basalt pillars take on a silver sheen, looking less like rocks and more like the ribs of some great, sleeping creature. We are left to ponder the sophisticated minds that saw the potential in this hill, who recognized that its position was perfect for observing the dance of the planets. They were observers, mathematicians, and dreamers who looked at the horizon and saw not a boundary, but a bridge. And so, the mystery of Gunung Padang remains etched in its orientation, a silent testimony to a time when humanity lived in total harmony with the cycles of the earth and the silent, drifting stars above. The mountain holds its secrets close, wrapped in the shadows of the trees and the weight of the ages, waiting for the moment when the stars align once more, and the truth of its purpose is finally revealed to those who have the patience to listen. Whispers travel differently in the humid air of West Java, carrying the weight of 1,000 years in a single breath of wind. While the archaeologists measure the density of the andesite and the geologists debate the age of the soil, the people who live in the shadow of Gunung Padang hold a different kind of knowledge, one passed down not through carbon dating, but through the rhythmic cadence of storytelling. To them, the mountain is not merely a puzzle of stratigraphy or a relic of the Younger Dryas. It is a living monument to the power of the soul and the reach of a legendary king. Local memory tells of a time when the world was more fluid, when the boundary between the physical and the ethereal was as thin as a morning mist. In these tales, the massive stone terraces were not hauled by thousands of labourers over generations, but were summoned into existence in the span of a single, moonlit night. They speak of Prabu Siliwangi, the great 14th century ruler of the Pajajaran kingdom, a figure who looms so large in Sundanese culture that he has become more spirit than man. It is said that Siliwangi, possessing a mastery over the elemental forces of the earth, commanded the stones to rise and arrange themselves in an attempt to build a palace in a solitary evening. As the legend goes, he worked with a celestial speed, but the first light of dawn broke over the horizon before the final touches were complete, leaving the site as we see it today, a grand, unfinished staircase reaching toward the heavens. This sense of the miraculous permeates every inch of the mountain's grassy slopes. For the Sundanese people, Gunung Padang is a pundan berundak, a sacred stepped mound that serves as a terrestrial anchor for the divine. It is a place of ziyarah or pilgrimage, where the modern world is expected to fall away. Visitors do not just come to look at the stones, they come to touch them, to sit in the stillness, and to participate in the ancient practice of meditation. There is a belief that the mountain acts as a giant battery of spiritual energy, a source that can replenish the weary or grant clarity to the confused. As the years passed, these traditional beliefs merged with more modern reports of the unexplained. Many who have spent the night on the terraces, wrapped in the cool embrace of the highland air, tell stories of strange dancing lights that flicker between the pillars, glowing orbs that move with an intelligence that defies the wind. Some speak of a deep, resonant humming that seems to vibrate upward through the soles of the feet, as if the very core of the mountain were a machine still idling after 30,000 years of rest. These accounts are often dismissed by the scientific mind as hallucinations brought on by the thin air or the play of moonlight on wet stone. Yet the consistency of the reports across generations lends the mountain an aura of persistent mystery. To walk the terraces today is to step into a space where time feels heavy and slow. The air seems to thicken as you ascend, and the chatter of the valley below fades into a profound, ringing silence. This is the spiritual heart of the land, a place where the ancestors are thought to still walk, guarding the secrets buried deep within the third and fourth layers of the structure. The local guardians of the site speak of the mountain with a quiet reverence, treating the stones not as cold objects of study, but as sentient witnesses to the rise and fall of civilizations. They believe that the energy of the site is protective, shielding the valley from harm, provided that those who visit approach with a clean heart and a quiet mind. And so, the legend of King Siliwangi becomes a metaphor for the site itself, a bridge between the known history of the Middle Ages and a much deeper, forgotten past that stretches back into the darkness of the Ice Age. Whether the stones were moved by the hands of a king or the sophisticated tools of a lost culture, the result remains the same, a place that demands a pause in the frantic pace of human life. The mountain asks for nothing but your presence, inviting you to consider the possibility that our ancestors knew something we have since forgotten, a way to harness the energy of the earth and the light of the stars to create something that time itself cannot erase. As the mist rolls in from the surrounding peaks, swallowing the terraces in a soft white shroud, one cannot help but feel that the mountain is not just a tomb or a temple, but a silent teacher, waiting for a generation patient enough to learn its language. The scent of damp earth and crushed fern lingers in the air, a reminder that the mountain is a living thing, breathing through the pores of its ancient stones. To stand upon the summit of Gunung Padang is to stand at the edge of a great chronological abyss, looking down into a darkness that the standard history of our species has long ignored. For decades, we have been taught a comfortable narrative, a steady, linear progression that began with the Neolithic Revolution, roughly 10,000 years ago. We were told that before this time, our ancestors were simple wanderers, hunters and gatherers who possessed neither the social complexity nor the engineering prowess to move mountains. And yet, the deep layers of this site, buried beneath the soil of West Java, whisper a different story, a story that dates back 30,000 years to a time when the world was gripped by the ice of the Pleistocene. If the radiocarbon dating holds true, if these lower chambers and sculpted columns were indeed shaped by human hands 28,000 years before the Common Era, then we are forced to confront a radical shift in our understanding of the human journey. The stratigraphy, or the study of these layered rock deposits, suggests that the builders of Gunung Padang were not just reacting to their environment, but mastering it with a sophistication that should not have existed. To accept this is to accept that the cradle of civilization was not a single point in the Fertile Crescent, but perhaps a global phenomenon, a series of forgotten sparks that flickered in the deep night of prehistory. It requires us to look past the conventional timeline and wonder what other wonders lie hidden beneath the silt of rising oceans and the roots of ancient jungles. This revelation does not stand in isolation. Far to the west, in the rugged highlands of southeastern Turkey, the site of Göbekli Tepe has already begun to pull at the threads of our historical tapestry. There, massive T-shaped pillars, carved with intricate reliefs of foxes and scorpions, were raised nearly 12,000 years ago, a date that was once considered impossible for such monumental architecture. But Gunung Padang suggests an even deeper antiquity, pushing the horizon of human achievement back by another 20,000 years. While the pyramids of Giza are masterpieces of the Bronze Age, standing as testament to the power of the pharaohs 4,500 years ago, they are, in the grand scale of Gunung Padang, merely the latest additions to a very old tradition of stoneworking. We begin to see a pattern emerging from the mists, a lineage of megalithic builders who understood the geometry of the earth long before the first city-states were ever recorded. As the mind wanders through these vast stretches of time, a haunting possibility begins to take shape: the existence of a global maritime culture that thrived during the last ice age. During the Pleistocene, the sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than they are today. Indonesia was not an archipelago of scattered islands, but part of a massive continental landmass known as Sundaland. It was a fertile tropical paradise, a vast plain connecting Sumatra, Java, and Borneo to the mainland of Asia. Perhaps Gunung Padang was a spiritual anchor for this lost continent, a beacon for a people who navigated the coastlines and river valleys of a world that has since been swallowed by the sea. When the ice melted and the waters rose during the turbulent period known as the Younger Dryas, a sudden 1,000-year return to glacial conditions, the heart of this culture may have been submerged, leaving only high-altitude sanctuaries like Gunung Padang to guard their secrets. The engineering required to construct such a site, even in its earliest and deepest phases, speaks to a level of social organization that defies our current models. It implies a society with a division of labor, a shared cosmological vision, and a mastery of acoustics and geology. They were not merely stacking rocks, they were composing a symphony in stone, selecting volcanic columnar joints for their natural resonance and their ability to be fitted together like the pieces of a cosmic puzzle. This was not the work of a desperate people struggling for survival, but the work of a culture with the luxury of time, a culture that looked at a mountain and saw a canvas. As we peel back the layers of soil, we are not just uncovering stones, but the echoes of a lost language of architecture that flourished when the mammoths still roamed the northern plains. It is a humbling thought to realize that our modern civilization, with all its steel and silicon, is but a brief moment in the shadow of these 30,000-year-old walls. We are like children who have found a book with the first few chapters torn out, trying to piece together the beginning of the story from the clues left in the middle. The shift in perspective required to embrace Gunung Padang is not just a scientific challenge, but a philosophical one. It asks us to let go of our sense of superiority over the past, and to recognize that the human spirit has always reached for the infinite, regardless of the tools at hand. The mountain does not care for our calendars or our categories. It simply exists, a silent witness to the rise and fall of countless suns, waiting for us to remember that we are part of a much older and more mysterious lineage than we ever dared to imagine. Meanwhile, the wind sighs through the gaps in the basalt, a sound like a distant choir singing in a tongue no longer spoken. The weight of these forgotten ages settles upon the landscape, turning the vibrant green of the jungle into shades of charcoal and silver as the light fades. We are reminded that history is not a solid road, but a river that constantly shifts its course, burying old truths and unearthing new questions. The stones of Gunung Padang are patient. They have waited 30 millennia to be heard, and they can wait a little longer for us to find the courage to believe what they are telling us. As the stars begin to peer through the canopy, aligning themselves with the ancient terraces as they have done for thousands of generations, the boundary between the past and the present begins to dissolve. In this stillness, the idea of a 30,000-year-old pyramid no longer feels like a radical claim, but like a homecoming, a return to a version of ourselves that we had nearly forgotten in the noise of the modern world. And so, we sit in the quiet, contemplating the possibility that the Neolithic revolution was not the beginning, but a rebirth, a recovery of knowledge that had been preserved through cataclysm and cold. The pyramids of Egypt, the circles of Stonehenge, and the temples of the Andes may all be the younger siblings of this great Indonesian matriarch. The mountain remains, cloaked in its mantle of earth and mystery, a reminder that the greatest stories are often the ones we have yet to rediscover, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the mist to clear. The sound of a single trowel scraping against volcanic stone carries a weight that spans millennia, a small rhythmic heartbeat echoing against the silence of the West Javanese highlands. It is a delicate dance between the urge to know and the duty to protect, a tension that defines the current era of exploration at Gunung Padang. As we look toward the horizon of what is yet to come, the mountain of light stands not just as a relic of the past, but as a challenge for the future. The earth here is soft, yet it holds its secrets with a stubborn grip, requiring a patience that matches the slow passage of the ages it has witnessed. Modern archaeology is no longer just a matter of shovels and grit, but a symphony of invisible light and silent echoes. The efforts to peel back the layers of Gunung Padang are moving into a phase of profound restraint, where the goal is to see without touching, to understand without disturbing the fragile equilibrium of the stones. Researchers are now looking toward the stars to see deep into the earth, turning to a technology known as muon tomography. This process utilizes cosmic rays, subatomic particles that rain down from the upper atmosphere, to map the density of the mountain. Just as an X-ray reveals the hidden architecture of the human frame, these particles pass through soil and stone, slowing down only when they encounter the dense basalt of the structures or passing freely through the hollow voids of hidden chambers. It is a quiet, non-invasive vigil, a way to peer through 30,000 years of sediment as if the mountain were made of glass. As these technologies mature, the air around the site hums with a quiet anticipation. There is a sense that we are standing on the threshold of a great unveiling. Beneath the terraces that we can touch, beneath the 5 levels that have already rewritten our understanding of the Neolithic, lie the deeper, untouched strata. These are the layers that date back to the height of the last ice age, a time when the world was a vastly different place. What remains to be discovered in those dark, cool depths is the subject of hushed speculation. Perhaps there are ceremonial halls where the ancient inhabitants watched the alignment of stars that have long since shifted their positions in the heavens. Perhaps there are archives of stone, or simply the discarded remnants of a life so alien to our own that we lack the vocabulary to describe it. The deeper we go, the further we move from the familiar into a realm where the boundary between nature and artifice becomes beautifully blurred. This pursuit of knowledge, however, must walk a narrow path. The mountain has become a place of pilgrimage, not just for the scientist, but for the seeker and the traveler. The balance between tourism and preservation is a delicate one. a constant negotiation between the need to share this wonder with the world and the necessity of keeping it whole for those who will come after us. As more feet tread upon the basalt stairs, the stones themselves begin to whisper of their weariness. There is a growing movement to ensure that the site does not become a victim of its own fame, that the sanctity of the mountain is maintained even as its mysteries are laid bare. The future of Gunung Padang lies in this stewardship, in the understanding that some secrets are best kept in the dim light of the earth until we are truly ready to receive them. And so, the work continues at a measured pace, mirroring the slow, deliberate construction of the mountain itself. The researchers do not rush, for they know that time is their greatest ally and their most formidable opponent. They study the stratigraphy, the way the layers of soil and rock tell a chronological story, with the care of a jeweler examining a priceless gem. Each grain of carbon, each fragment of worked stone, is a word in a sentence that has taken 30,000 years to write. We are currently in the middle of that sentence, peering back at the beginning while wondering where the narrative will lead us next. Meanwhile, the mountain remains a living entity in the hearts of the local community. To them, it is not just a data point or a carbon date. It is a place of power, a link to the ancestors who first saw the potential in these hills. This cultural memory, though it may lack the rigid proof of a laboratory, provides a different kind of truth. It reminds us that the history of a place is not just found in the objects left behind, but in the stories told in its shadow. The future of the site will involve a merging of these two worlds, the empirical evidence of the drill core and the spiritual resonance of the mountain's peak. As the years pass, the mist will continue to roll in from the surrounding valleys, cloaking the terraces in a soft grey veil. It is in these quiet moments, when the tourists have departed and the tools are laid down, that the true scale of the mystery reveals itself. We are looking at a monument that may have been under construction for longer than the entirety of recorded history. The sheer audacity of such a project, to build and rebuild upon the same sacred ground for 20,000 years, suggests a level of social stability and purpose that challenges everything we thought we knew about the human journey. It suggests that our ancestors were not merely struggling to survive, but were engaged in a multi-generational dialogue with the earth and the sky. What we find in the deepest layers of Gunung Padang may ultimately change the way we see ourselves. If a complex society existed during the depths of the Ice Age, it means that the human spirit has always been inclined toward the monumental, toward the creation of something that outlasts the individual life. It means that civilization is not a recent invention, but an ancient fire that has been smothered and rekindled many times over. The Mountain of Light is a beacon from one of those earlier fires, a glowing ember that has survived the damp and the dark of the millennia. As we look forward, we must accept that some questions may never be fully answered. The mountain may choose to keep its most profound secrets locked away in the basalt, forever beyond the reach of our senses and our logic, and perhaps that is as it should be. There is a certain grace in the unknown, a beauty in the realization that the world is still capable of surprising us. The future of Gunung Padang is not just about the answers we find, but about the quality of the questions we ask. It invites us to be humble, to recognize that we are but a brief flicker in the long, slow burning of the Earth's history. The path ahead is one of careful steps and quiet observation. As the new technologies of the 21st century meet the ancient stones of the 30th millennium before our own, a new story begins to emerge. It is a story of resilience, of a people who looked at a mountain and saw a temple, who looked at the stars and saw a map. The excavation is not just a digging down, but a reaching back, a hand extended through the fog of time to touch the hands of those who first laid these stones. And as the sun sets over the Karyamukti village, casting long shadows across the terraces, we are reminded that the Mountain of Light has all the time in the world.
It has waited 30,000 years for us to notice. It can wait a little longer for us to understand.
There is a specific kind of silence that only exists in the presence of very old stone. It is not the absence of sound, but rather a density of time, a weight that seems to press against the air until even the wind feels heavy as it weaves through the columnar joints of the andesite. To stand upon the summit of Gunung Padang is to stand upon a bridge that spans the entire history of human consciousness, a bridge whose foundations are anchored in a reality we are only just beginning to perceive. We often think of stone as something cold and inert, yet here it feels strangely alive, as if the basalt pillars are holding their breath, keeping a secret that has been whispered from one millennium to the next. The earth does not forget. It merely covers its memories in layers of silt and volcanic ash, waiting for a generation with the patience to brush the dust away. As we look back across the vast expanse of 30,000 years, the scale of human achievement begins to shift in our minds. We are accustomed to a timeline that begins in the fertile crescents of the Middle East, a story of gradual progress that moves from the hunter-gatherer to the farmer, and eventually to the architect. But Gunung Padang suggests a different rhythm to the dance of civilization. It hints at a world where deep knowledge was held by those we once considered primitive, a world where the stars were not just lights in the sky, but a complex language that guided the placement of every terrace and every block. The builders who first shaped this mountain were not merely surviving, they were communicating with the infinite. They were carving their presence into the very bones of the world, ensuring that even if their names were lost to the winds, their intent would remain. Imagine for a moment the first hands that touched these stones. Try to feel the texture of the raw rock as it was pulled from the earth, the vibration of the tools, the rhythmic sound of labor echoing across the valley. These were people who saw the world not as a resource to be conquered, but as a sacred canvas to be honored. They understood the geometry of the hills and the flow of the underground waters. In the deep quiet of the night, as the humidity of the Indonesian jungle settles like a cool shroud over the mountain, one can almost hear the ghosts of their conversations. The planning, the chanting, the shared effort of a community working towards something that would outlast their children's children by tens of thousands of years. They were building for us, even if they could never have imagined who we would be or what strange machines we would bring to their sacred site. The resilience of stone is perhaps the most humbling thing we can encounter. Our modern world is built of glass, steel, and digital signals, things that are fragile and fleeting. A city of steel can rust away in a few centuries. A digital record can vanish in the blink of an eye. But a mountain carved into a temple possesses a stubborn immortality. It endures the rise and fall of empires, the changing of climates, and the slow drift of the continents themselves. The stratigraphy of Gunung Padang, those distinct layers of human activity separated by thousands of years of silence, tells a story of persistence. It tells us that humanity has climbed this peak again and again, drawn by a magnetism that transcends culture or creed. Whether they were the masters of the Ice Age or the priests of a later era, they all looked at this specific horizon and felt the same pull toward the sky. As the years passed and the jungle reclaimed the terraces, the mountain became a place of myth, a mountain of light where the physical and the spiritual were said to meet. The local communities who lived in the shadow of the peak for generations treated the stones with a quiet reverence, sensing that the ground beneath their feet was not like other ground. They did not need radiocarbon dating or ground-penetrating radar to know that they were walking in the footsteps of giants. There is a wisdom in that simple recognition, a recognition that we are part of a much longer chain of being than our history books usually allow. We are the inheritors of a legacy that is written in the landscape, a legacy that requires us to look beyond the surface of things and listen to the echoes that vibrate in the deep earth. In the modern era, we often feel a sense of disconnection from the past, as if the people who lived before the dawn of written history were a different species entirely. But when we look at the precision of the alignments at Gunung Padang, we see a reflection of our own curiosity and our own desire for order. The people of the younger Dryas, facing a world of catastrophic change and shifting ice, sought stability in the eternal. They found it in the mountain. They found it in the way the sun struck the stones at the turning of the seasons. By building here, they were anchoring themselves to the cosmos, creating a fixed point in a chaotic world. It is a gesture that is profoundly human, a scream against the void, a declaration that says, "We were here, and we understood the beauty of the light." The mountain remains a mystery, and perhaps it is better that way. While the archaeologists continue their work, peeling back the layers of soil to reveal the hidden chambers and the ancient masonry, the true essence of Gunung Padang stays just out of reach. It lives in the spaces between the stones and in the shadows that lengthen as the day begins to fade. It is a reminder that there will always be more to discover, that the earth is far older and far more complex than we can ever fully grasp. We are like children playing in the ruins of a library, marveling at the shapes of letters we cannot yet read, sensing the vastness of the stories contained within the walls. As the light begins to change, the mountain takes on a different character. The sharp edges of the basalt columns soften, and the deep greens of the surrounding forest turn to shades of indigo and charcoal. The air grows still, and the sounds of the village below, the distant call of a bird, the rustle of leaves, seem to drift away, leaving only the profound, ancient stillness of the peak. This is the time when the mountain seems most present, when the gap between the present and the prehistoric feels thinnest. In this twilight hour, the 30,000 years that separate us from the first builders seem to collapse into a single moment of shared wonder. We can see them now in the mind's eye, the figures standing on these very terraces, watching the same sun dip below the same horizon. Their faces are lit by the dying embers of the day, their shadows stretching long across the stone floor. They are tired from their work, but they look out over the valley with a sense of peace, knowing that they have created something that will endure. They do not know of the millennia to come, of the civilizations that will rise and fall, or of the people who will one day come with sensors and screens to probe the depths of their temple. They only know the warmth of the stone beneath their feet and the vast starlit sky opening up above them. And so, we leave the mountain to its vigil. The sun sets slowly over the terraces of Gunung Padang, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. The shadows swallow the lower levels first, creeping up the ancient stairs until only the very tip of the summit is touched by the last rays of light. The great stone pillars, which have seen more sunsets than we can possibly imagine, settle into the cool embrace of the night. The secrets of the mountain remain buried in its heart, protected by the weight of the ages and the silence of the earth. As the stars begin to appear one by one, mirroring the lights that the ancient builders once tracked so carefully, we are left with a sense of profound gratitude. The mountain has waited for us to notice, and it will continue to wait. A silent sentinel standing at the edge of time, watching over the dreams of the past and the mysteries of the future.